countdown has started. 15 prisoners, 15 execution chambers. The first woman dies in 262 days. Welcome to Crime Lens.
Order that you shall be put to death by execution in the mode prescribed by law, and that you shall be transferred to custody of the warden at the Tennessee Prison Community. And further, the 12th day of January 1997, your body shall be subjected to shock by sufficient current of electricity. God have mercy upon you.
Case 1. Christa Gail Pike. She kept a piece of the victim's skull as a trophy, showed it to classmates, bragged about the murder. January 12th, 1995. Knoxville, Tennessee. Christa Pike was 18 years old, enrolled at a Job Corps center dating a boy named Darrell Ship. She became convinced that another student, 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer, was trying to steal him. Pike, Ship, and their friend Shadala Peterson lured Slemmer to an abandoned steam plant near the University of Tennessee campus under the pretense of reconciliation. Once isolated, they attacked. For 30 minutes, Pike and Ship tortured Slemmer, beat her, mutilated her. Finally, Pike smashed Slemmer's skull with a piece of asphalt, killing her. A pentagram was carved into the body. Pike took a fragment of Slemmer's skull. Back at the Job Corps Center, she showed it to classmates. The crime was discovered within 36 hours. Pike was arrested and confessed, though she claimed the attack got out of control. Ship was tried as an adult. Peterson cooperated with authorities in exchange for probation. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Pike's own statements, the piece of skull, witness testimony. On March 22, 1996, Pike was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy. 8 days later, she was sentenced to death. Ship received life in prison with parole eligibility in November 2026. Peterson received probation. Pike's time in prison included additional violence. In 2001, she attacked a fellow inmate, nearly strangling her to death. In 2012, she was linked to a prison escape plot involving a corrections officer. If executed, Pike will be the first woman Tennessee has put to death in over 2 centuries. September 30th, 2026. After 32 years on death row, Christa Gail Pike faces lethal injection. Case 2. Danny Lee Hill. This 12-year-old boy was found barely alive in a wooded field, his body burned and beaten. He died 2 days later. September 10th, 1985. Warren, Ohio. Raymond Fife left home on his bicycle just after 5 in the evening to visit a friend. He never arrived. His family searched the neighborhood for hours. Just before 10 that night, Raymond's father found him in a field behind a supermarket. The boy was critically injured, barely conscious. He'd suffered extreme trauma and burns. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but 2 days later, he died. The autopsy revealed the full horror: asphyxiation, subdural hematoma, multiple traumatic injuries, ligature marks around his neck, extensive bruising, burn wounds, severe internal injuries consistent with sexual assault. Investigators focused on 2 local youths, Danny Lee Hill, 18, and Timothy Combs, 17. Hill came to the police station asking about a reward for information. Officers noticed he knew details about the crime that hadn't been released publicly. Days later, Hill returned with his uncle, a police detective, and confessed. He blamed Combs as the main aggressor. At trial, prosecutors presented forensic evidence linking bite marks on the victim's body to Hill. Witnesses placed both men at the scene. One saw Hill discard an object in the woods later connected to the assault. Students reported seeing Hill and Combs in the area when Raymond disappeared. One heard a child scream. Hill was convicted on all counts in January 1986. During sentencing, judges cited the extreme cruelty inflicted on a defenseless child. He was sentenced to death. Combs received multiple life sentences due to his age. He died in prison in 2018, July 22, 2026. After 41 years on death row, Danny Lee Hill faces execution. Case 3. James Garfield Broadnax. He didn't just confess to murder. He went on television and dared them to execute him. June 19, 2008, Garland, Texas. Just after 1 a.m, a man riding his bicycle home from work spotted 2 bodies lying in the street outside a recording studio. Stephen Swan and Matthew Butler, both Christian music producers, had been shot to death. Hours later, James Broadnax showed up at a Dallas apartment bragging about hitting a lick. He pulled out Swan's driver's license as proof. Then he and his cousin left in Swan's stolen car to sell it. 15 minutes later, someone at the apartment saw breaking news coverage of the double murder. They called police immediately. That evening, officers in Texarkana spotted Swan's vehicle and pulled it over. Broadnax was driving. He had outstanding warrants. They arrested him without incident. No panic, no confusion. Just a 19-year-old calmly stepping into handcuffs. Then Broadnax did something almost unheard of. He gave multiple television interviews to local news stations. On camera, he confessed in detail to murdering both men. Explained that he and his cousin traveled to Garland specifically to commit robbery. Admitted he alone pulled the trigger. But he didn't stop there. Broadnax told reporters he hoped the jury would sentence him to death. Said if given life in prison, he'd commit violence again. The interviews became the backbone of the prosecution's case. The defense argued he was high on marijuana and PCP during the murders and still intoxicated during the confessions. Prosecutors brought in the arresting officer, journalists, a jail nurse. All described Broadnax as lucid, coherent, rational. The jury convicted him. He was 20 when he arrived on death row, April 30th, 2026. 18 years later, James Garfield Broadnax faces lethal injection. Case 4. Cedric Allen Ricks. The 12-year-old boy made a choice that saved his life. He pretended to die. May 1st, 2013. Bedford, Texas. Cedric Ricks showed up at his ex-girlfriend's apartment. Roxanne Sanchez had ended their relationship, but Ricks couldn't accept it. What started as an argument turned into something far worse. Ricks grabbed a knife. He attacked Sanchez first, stabbing her repeatedly. Then he turned on her 8-year-old son, Anthony. The boy didn't survive. But there was another child in the room. Marcus, Sanchez's 12-year-old son. Ricks stabbed him 25 times. Neck, chest, back, hands, face. Marcus was bleeding out, struggling to stay conscious. Then he heard his younger brother's final sounds, the gurgling, the dying breaths. Marcus made the same sound. Ricks heard it, believed Marcus was dead, and stopped. The moment Ricks left, Marcus forced himself to stand, found help, survived. At trial, he looked Ricks in the eye and told the jury exactly what happened in that apartment. Ricks fled to Oklahoma in Sanchez's car, called family members, confessed. Police tracked his cell phone and arrested him. Other inmates assaulted him in an Oklahoma jail. Back in Texas, he requested solitary confinement, claiming he feared for his safety. The trial lasted days. The jury took 45 minutes to convict him. During sentencing, prosecutors presented evidence of Ricks's history of violence against women. His mother testified about trying to help him change. Ricks himself said he wanted to die. The jury gave him what he asked for, March 11th, 2026. After 13 years on death row, Cedric Allen Ricks faces execution at Huntsville. Case 5, Tony Carruthers. They were buried alive beneath a casket, dirt packed into their noses and mouths as they suffocated underground. 1994, Shelby County, Tennessee. Prosecutors say Tony Carruthers wanted control of a drug operation run by Marcellus Anderson, a 21-year-old dealer in Memphis. Carruthers and his accomplice, James Montgomery, devised a plan. They lured Anderson, his mother Deloy, and his 17-year-old friend, Frederick Tucker, under false pretenses. The 3 victims were kidnapped and driven to Rose Hill Cemetery. What happened next became one of the most horrifying crime scenes in Tennessee history. 2 victims were shot. 1 was strangled. But none of those injuries killed them. All 3 were thrown into a pit beneath the ground. A casket was placed directly on top of them. Dirt was shoveled over everything, sealing them inside. When investigators exhumed the bodies, the medical examiner found dirt packed into the nose and mouth of at least 1 victim. They were still breathing when they were buried. Death came slowly in the dark, beneath the weight of the earth. Carruthers was arrested and convicted in 1996, but his trial became as notorious as the crime. He went through 6 court-appointed attorneys, complaining, clashing, threatening each one. Eventually, the judge refused to appoint another. Carruthers represented himself at trial. Legal experts argue he was mentally incompetent, fixated on conspiracy theories, unable to cooperate with counsel. If executed, he'll be the first person in nearly a century put to death after representing himself. Carruthers has spent over 30 years on death row, filing motions, insisting he was framed. Courts have rejected every claim. May 21st, 2026. Tony Carruthers faces lethal injection in Tennessee. Case 6, Anthony Darrell Hines. The motel maid was cleaning a room when he attacked. She fought back, but it wasn't enough. March 3rd, 1985. Catherine Jean Jenkins, 31 years old, was found dead in room 21 of the Seabon Motel in Kingston Springs, Tennessee. She'd been stabbed multiple times in the chest, wounds ranging from 2.5 to over 6 inches deep. Her clothing had been torn off. A $20 bill was tucked beneath her wristband. Jenkins had been left in charge of the motel that morning, responsible for handling cash. A bank bag with $100 for making change was found near her body, now empty and bloody. Her wallet, car keys, and silver Volvo were missing. Anthony Hines had arrived in Tennessee from North Carolina 2 days earlier, carrying a hunting knife concealed beneath his shirt. He checked into room 9 wearing a green army jacket, fatigues, and boots. Witnesses saw him walking around the motel that morning, purchasing a sandwich. Early afternoon, witnesses observed Jenkins's car leaving the motel at high speed, driven by a tall, light-haired man, later identified as Hines. Hines fled to Bowling Green, Kentucky, displaying dried blood on his shirt, driving the stolen Volvo. When he reached his sister's home, he admitted stabbing someone with a hunting knife, claimed a scuffle occurred with the motel operator, demonstrated the act. Police arrested him, initially denying the murder. But investigators connected him through physical evidence. Jenkins's wallet was recovered wrapped in thermal underwear near the abandoned car. The key to room 9 was found at a campsite near Cave City, Kentucky. Knife marks on the motel room wall matched the weapon Hines carried. In 2020, a federal appeals court granted Hines a new trial. The Supreme Court overturned that ruling 8-1. August the 13th, 2026. 42 years later, Anthony Darrell Hines faces execution. Case 7. Gerald Robert Hand. 3 wives, 3 murders, 3 life insurance payouts. Gerald Hand was married 4 times. 1 marriage ended in divorce. The other 3 wives were all murdered. March 1976. Hand's first wife, Donna, was found strangled with a plastic bag over her head in what appeared to be a staged burglary. September 1979. His second wife, Lori, was found strangled with a plastic bag over her head and shot twice. Both cases went cold. In each instance, Hand had taken out life insurance policies on his wives shortly before their deaths. He collected the money and moved on. January 15, 2002. Hand's 4th wife, Jill, was shot to death inside their Delaware County, Ohio home, along with Walter Welch, a longtime friend. Hand claimed he heard a disturbance, armed himself, and encountered an intruder. He said he opened fire, killing the man who turned out to be Welch. But detectives found problems immediately. No forced entry, nothing stolen. Crime scene didn't match his story. Investigators dug deeper. Welch wasn't a stranger. He'd been Hand's best man, a longtime friend and employee. Family members contradicted Hand's claim. They'd been out of contact. Prosecutors theorized Hand hired Welch to carry out the earlier murders, then killed him to silence a witness who knew too much. The financial motive was clear. Bills went unpaid. But life insurance policies on Jill were kept meticulously current. Hand was convicted of murdering Jill and Welch in 2003. It was the first capital murder conviction in Delaware County history. He was sentenced to death. Since then, Hand has remained on death row for 25 years. Ohio governors repeatedly delayed his execution due to issues obtaining lethal injection drugs. Each reprieve extended his time, but none overturned the conviction. June 17, 2026. Gerald Robert Hand faces execution at 74 years old. Case 8. Charles Victor Thompson. The ECI night started with police trying to keep the peace. It ended with 2 people dead and a killer on the run. April 29th, 1998. Texas officers pulled Charles Thompson away from his ex-girlfriend's apartment after a heated argument with her new boyfriend, Darren Kane. 3 hours later, Thompson came back. This time he had a gun. He kicked down the door. Kane didn't have time to react before Thompson fired multiple rounds into his body at close range. Kane collapsed, dying almost instantly on the floor. But Thompson wasn't done. He reloaded, turned to Glenda Heslop, the woman he couldn't let go, spoke to her, then fired a bullet directly into her face. The round tore through her cheek, shattered her dentures, nearly severed her tongue. She survived long enough to reach a hospital, but the damage was too severe. Days later, doctors removed her from life support. Thompson fled, dumped the weapon in a creek, and eventually surrendered. A jury sentenced him to death in 1999. Then in 2005, while awaiting transfer to death row, Thompson pulled off one of the most brazen jail escapes in modern history. Using a fake badge and civilian clothes smuggled inside a legal binder, he walked out of Harris County Jail, posing as a state investigator. He rode freight trains across state lines, stole a bicycle in Louisiana, panhandled by pretending to be a disaster victim. 3 days later, drunk outside a liquor store, police found him planning an escape to Canada. He's been in solitary confinement ever since. January 28, 2026. After more than 20 years on death row, Charles Victor Thompson will face lethal injection at Huntsville, Texas. Case 9. Edward Lee Busby Jr. She was a retired professor who spent her life helping children with learning disabilities. He sealed her mouth with duct tape and left her to suffocate in a car trunk. January 2004. Fort Worth, Texas. Laura Lee Crane, 77 years old, finished grocery shopping and walked to her car. Edward Busby was waiting. Prosecutors say he targeted her randomly, abducted her from the parking lot, robbed her of more than $700, and forced her into her own vehicle. Crane was alive during the abduction. Over the following days, her credit cards and a blank check were used as Busby and his companion, Kathleen Latimer, traveled north. Police later traced the transactions, reconstructing Crane's final movements. February 3, 2004. Crane's body was discovered at the bottom of an embankment near Interstate 35 outside Davis, Oklahoma. Her mouth had been sealed with duct tape. The autopsy revealed she died from asphyxiation. Investigators determined Busby drove her car into Oklahoma and disposed of her body alone. Busby was arrested in Oklahoma City driving Crane's vehicle. During questioning, he confessed and led police directly to the body. At trial, prosecutors described how duct tape was purchased, how Crane was restrained, how she died while still alive in the trunk. The jury convicted Busby of capital murder in 2005 and sentenced him to death. Latimer, his co-conspirator, received life in prison. She won't be eligible for parole until 2034. The disparity has sparked debate for years. Busby's lawyers argued he has significant intellectual limitations, attended special education classes, dropped out as a teenager. They claimed Latimer manipulated him. Courts rejected those arguments repeatedly. His execution was delayed multiple times due to COVID-19 and legal challenges. No stays remain. May 14th, 2026. 22 years after Laura Lee Crane's murder, Edward Lee Busby Jr. faces lethal injection, Case 10. Cleveland Ramon Jackson. 8 people were shot. A 3-year-old and a 17-year-old didn't survive. January 3rd, 2000, Lima, Ohio. Cleveland Jackson and his half-brother Jeronique Cunningham targeted an apartment on Eureka Street, believing money and drugs were inside. What started as a planned robbery ended with 2 people dead and 6 others wounded. Jackson lured Shane Lyles out of the apartment under the pretense of a drug deal. While Jackson kept Lyles distracted in the stairwell, Cunningham stayed inside with several teenagers. He ordered them into the kitchen. When they didn't move fast enough, he hit one with a gun. Jackson forced Lyles back into the apartment at gunpoint, robbed him, demanded more. When Lyles said he had nothing left, Jackson shot him in the back. Then both men opened fire on everyone in the kitchen. They kept shooting until they ran out of ammunition. Every person in the room was hit at least once. 3-year-old Jayla Grant and 17-year-old Lenishia Williams were killed. 6 others survived their injuries. At trial, Jackson admitted to shooting Lyles but denied responsibility for the others. He claimed his gun discharged accidentally, that Cunningham's weapon malfunctioned, causing Cunningham to grab Jackson's gun and continue firing while Jackson fled. Cunningham told the opposite story, insisting Jackson planned everything. The jury found Jackson guilty and recommended death. His background was raised during sentencing. His father was stabbed to death in front of him as a child. His mother struggled with addiction, attempted suicide multiple times. Jackson was removed from her care, sexually assaulted in foster placement, had a violent juvenile history. Prosecutors argued none of it excused murdering a toddler and a teenager during a robbery. July the 15th, 2026, after 25 years on death row, Cleveland Ramon Jackson faces lethal injection, Case 11. Kendrick Antonio Simpson. It started over a baseball cap, January the 16th, 2006. Inside a hip-hop nightclub in Oklahoma City, Kendrick Simpson got into a heated argument. The kind of stupid confrontation that happens every weekend at bars across America. But when the club closed and everyone spilled onto the street, Simpson didn't let it go. He climbed into the passenger seat of a car, grabbed an assault rifle, and opened fire on another vehicle carrying 3 young men. The bullets tore through metal and glass. 20-year-old Glenn Palmer died instantly. 19-year-old Anthony Jones never made it home. A third man survived, but barely. After the shooting, Simpson didn't stay quiet. He bragged about it, told people he was a monster, said they shouldn't play with him like that. A former cellmate later testified that Simpson laughed about the murders, showed no remorse, even talked about threatening witnesses. The defense tried to explain it away. Simpson had survived a drive-by shooting in 2004, took 5 bullets, needed multiple surgeries. Then came Hurricane Katrina. He fled New Orleans traumatized, they said. Post-traumatic stress disorder, they argued, a flashback, a dissociative episode. The jury didn't buy it. Simpson was convicted and sentenced to death in 2007. He spent nearly 20 years on Oklahoma's death row, writing poetry, earning his GED. Advocates say he's changed. The state says he's a remorseless killer who executed 2 men over nothing. On January 14, 2026, the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board will make a clemency recommendation. Governor Kevin Stitt holds the final decision. February 12, 2026. If the sentence stands, Kendrick Antonio Simpson dies by lethal injection. Case 12. James Derek O'Neill. He was kicked out of the house. 4 days later, he came back with a gun. December 7, 1993. Cincinnati, Ohio. James O'Neill and his wife Carol had been living together with 6 children, a blended family struggling to stay together. That night, they had a physical altercation. Carol kicked James and his 2 sons out of the home. She filed a domestic complaint and planned to change the locks. James was left homeless. His belongings remained inside. The fate of his 2 sons is unclear from court records. December 11, 1993. James returned to the residence enraged. He intended to teach Carol a lesson for evicting his sons. He broke through the front door, chased Carol upstairs into a bedroom, and fired 3 shots. She died from her wounds. One of Carol's children, Ricardo, was also targeted. James attempted to shoot the boy, but the gun jammed. Ricardo survived. James fled, but was found later that day hiding in a nearby house. He surrendered without resistance and admitted to officers he'd shot Carol, though he initially claimed he hadn't killed her. Forensic examination matched the bullets recovered from Carol's body to a pistol found in James's possession at arrest. He was indicted for purposely causing Carol's death during aggravated burglary, causing her death with prior calculation and design, attempted murder of Ricardo, and additional burglary counts. A jury convicted him and recommended the death penalty. O'Neill's execution has been delayed repeatedly due to Ohio's inability to secure lethal injection drugs. Originally scheduled for February 2021, Governor Mike DeWine postponed it, citing pharmaceutical shortages and public safety concerns about untested protocols. After 33 years on death row, the execution has been reset. August 19, 2026. James Derek O'Neill faces lethal injection at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility. Case 13, Melvin D. Bonell Jr. The police chase started with a car driving backward with its headlights off. It ended with a man dead from 2 gunshots. November 28, 1987, Cleveland, Ohio. Around 3 a.m, Shirley Hatch heard a knock at the kitchen door of the apartment she shared with Edward Birmingham and Robert Bonner. When she asked who it was, a voice responded, "Charles." Bonner opened the door. Melvin Bonell entered, uttered an expletive, and fired 2 close-range shots into Bonner's body. Hatch ran to the bedroom to alert Birmingham, then fled to call for help. Birmingham confronted Bonell in the kitchen, witnessing him pounding Bonner in the face while bullet holes were visible in his body. Birmingham ejected Bonell from the apartment. Shortly after, at approximately 3:40 in the morning, 2 Cleveland police officers observed a blue vehicle traveling backward with its headlights off. When the driver refused to stop, a high-speed chase began. The pursuit ended when the driver crashed into a funeral chapel. The man was immediately apprehended and placed on the ground. Birmingham later identified him at the hospital as the same person who attacked Bonner. Bonner died from his injuries, 1 gunshot to the chest, 1 to the pubic region. Police recovered a .25 caliber automatic pistol along the chase route. Forensic testing matched the bullets fired from the gun to the bullets extracted from Bonner's body. Spent casings recovered at the murder scene corresponded with the pistol. Bonell was convicted of aggravated burglary and multiple counts of aggravated murder. The jury recommended death. The trial judge imposed a sentence of death for each count. Recently, Bonell's defense team filed a motion citing newly discovered evidence, including bullets and shell casings retained by prosecutors, arguing this material could warrant a new trial. November 18, 2026. After 39 years on death row, Melvin D. Bonnell Jr. faces execution. Case 14. Jerome Henderson. His fingerprint was on the crime scene. His blood was on her coat, but the DNA inside her body didn't match. March 3, 1985. Cincinnati, Ohio. Mary Akoff, 26 years old, was found dead in her apartment. She'd been stabbed multiple times, sexually assaulted, her front door unlatched, a kitchen window unlocked. Investigators focused on Jerome Henderson after learning he'd been in the area between 5:30 and 6 that morning. Initially, he denied involvement. Then police lifted a fingerprint from the crime scene. It matched Henderson. A search of his residence recovered a knife, his shoes and clothing stained with blood, consistent with Akoff's blood type. A long black leather coat contained both blood-matching Akoff and semen consistent with Henderson's type. Additional evidence included a blood-stained rock, a fallen leaf, outside the kitchen window, muddy ground beneath it, and a bloody shoe print matching Henderson's gym shoes. Henderson was charged with burglary, assault, and aggravated murder. A jury convicted him, though he was acquitted of 1 charge involving Akoff. DNA testing in 2003 confirmed the semen on Henderson's coat belonged to him. The blood on the coat matched Akoff, but DNA evidence revealed something else. The semen found inside Akoff's body could not have come from Henderson. His attorneys highlighted this discrepancy in appeals, requesting additional DNA testing. Courts repeatedly denied the requests, ruling that overwhelming physical evidence, including blood, fingerprints, and eyewitness placement, supports the conviction. Henderson's execution has been delayed multiple times. Originally scheduled for December 2006, the Ohio Parole Board recommended clemency. Most recently set for September 2023, Governor DeWine postponed it to October 2026, citing difficulties securing execution drugs. After 41 years on death row, questions about DNA evidence linger. October 21st, 2026. Jerome Henderson faces lethal injection. Case 15, Gary Wayne Sutton. He's maintained his innocence for 35 years. The state says the evidence is solid. A private investigator says the case is riddled with problems. 1992, Blount County, Tennessee. Tommy Griffin and Connie Branham were murdered after a night of drinking at a Maryville bar. Griffin, 24, was found shot to death near Little River. Branham, 34, was discovered in her burned vehicle in Sevier County days later. Investigators tied Gary Wayne Sutton and his uncle James Dellinger to the murders. Both were convicted in separate trials. Dellinger received the death penalty for Griffin's murder and died on death row in 2023. Sutton received the death penalty for Griffin and a life sentence for Branham. Sutton has always claimed he was with his former girlfriend Carolyn Miller at the time of the murders. He's maintained his innocence throughout his incarceration. The case relied heavily on testimony from witnesses and evidence from former state medical examiner Charles Harlan, who was later stripped of his license for malpractice and found to have provided false testimony. A private investigator has questioned key evidence, including a crime scene photo showing spent shotgun shells and a witness who claimed to identify a white truck linked to Dellinger, but later expressed uncertainty. Sutton's attorney has filed motions highlighting these discrepancies. Sutton also has a pending claim regarding intellectual disability, which could render the execution unconstitutional under the Eighth Amendment. The state maintains Sutton's convictions are solid and have been upheld through every appellate court at state and federal levels. Blount County District Attorney Ryan Desmond emphasizes no evidence has been presented challenging Sutton's criminal responsibility. Sutton's execution was originally set for October 2022, but Governor Bill Lee halted all executions while the state revised its lethal injection protocol. The protocol was finalized in December 2024. December 3, 2026, Gary Wayne Sutton faces execution after 35 years on death row. These are the 15 prisoners scheduled to be executed in the United States in 2026. Their crimes span decades. Their appeals have been exhausted. The dates are set. These 15 won't be the last. Subscribe to Crime Lens and stay ahead of every execution, every appeal, every final moment.